On July 17, 1944, the war diary of the 14th Waffen Grenadier Division recorded routine patrol activity and minor skirmishing. 12,000 Ukrainian volunteers, recruited from Galicia in 1943, organized under German command, held positions astride the Brody-Lvov road. Their forward battalions occupied hastily prepared defenses in the villages east of Brody. Officers reported the situation stable. They had no idea that Soviet armor had already penetrated 15 kilometers behind their nominal flanks. Within 24 hours, 85,000 German soldiers would be encircled. Within 5 days, Third Army Corps would cease to exist, and of those 12,000 Ukrainian volunteers, only 3,000 would reach German lines alive. This is the story of the Brody Pocket, the southern jaw of the Soviet summer offensive that crushed 2 German army groups in 6 weeks. And it begins with a ghost army that didn't exist. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, and doctrine, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more in-depth World War analysis. Let's continue. On July 13, 1944, as German formations in Belarusia disintegrated into scattered remnants, Marshal Ivan Konev unleashed the first Ukrainian front against Army Group North Ukraine's southern anchor. The Lvov-Sandomierz offensive opened with crushing force against the seam between 4th Panzer Army and 1st Panzer Army, targeting defensive positions stretched across western Ukraine's rolling terrain. But the real story began 3 weeks earlier, with an armored formation that vanished from German intelligence entirely. Konev's operational deception achieved what Soviet planning termed Maskirovka at industrial scale. For 3 weeks preceding the assault, the 1st Guards Tank Army, over 500 armored vehicles and supporting mechanized infantry, moved westward from reserve positions in complete radio silence. The armored mass traveled exclusively at night, concealing vehicles under camouflage netting during daylight hours. Meanwhile, Soviet signals units maintained the Guards Tank Army's original electronic signature 200 kilometers to the rear, broadcasting false traffic patterns that German radio intercept stations dutifully logged. The Germans detected movement, but catastrophically underestimated Soviet strength. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights, increasingly rare due to fuel shortages and air superiority losses, failed to penetrate the deception. German intelligence assessed the forces opposite 4th Panzer Army at perhaps 60% of actual strength. The 1st Guards Tank Army, positioned for breakthrough exploitation, remained completely invisible to Army Group North Ukraine headquarters. 500 tanks vanished from the map, and now they were about to reappear directly behind the 3rd Army Corps. The assault began with artillery preparation across a 30-kilometer front. Soviet 152mm howitzers and Katyusha rocket batteries delivered concentrated fire against German strongpoints, while ground attack Sturmovik suppressed rear areas. Within hours, Soviet infantry penetrated the 1st defensive belt. The 4th Panzer Army, still reeling from the transfer of formations northward to contain the Belarusian disaster, held insufficient reserves to seal the breach. By nightfall on July 13th, Soviet mechanized spearheads had driven 15 kilometers into German rear areas. And then, the concealed 1st Guards Tank Army surged forward through the gap. The exploitation phase moved at a tempo German logistics could not match. Studebaker US-6 trucks, American-made, delivered through Lend-Lease, carried ammunition and fuel supplies forward across terrain that would have mired horse-drawn Wehrmacht columns. By July 1944, 182,938 of these 6-wheelers had reached Soviet formations. The Red Army had been transformed from a force that advanced on foot into a mechanized juggernaut capable of sustaining operations across distances that would have starved earlier offensives. German commanders faced the same calculus that had destroyed Army Group Center: insufficient mobile reserves dispersed across excessive frontage against an enemy concealing true strength until the decisive moment. 3. Army Corps, positioned near Brody, stood directly in the path of Konev's main effort. Within 5 days, Encirclement would trap 85,000 German soldiers. Among the formations caught in the developing pocket was a unit unlike any other in the Wehrmacht order of battle. The 14th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS, the Galician Division, comprised 12,000 Ukrainian volunteers recruited from the region in 1943. These non-German SS troops held positions directly astride the Brody-Lvov road as the first Ukrainian front's breakthrough gathered momentum. Their forward battalions occupied hastily prepared positions in the villages east of Brody. On July 17th, the division's war diary recorded routine patrol activity and minor skirmishing. No indication that the entire strategic situation had collapsed. Soviet tank columns had already passed 15 kilometers behind their nominal flanks. The Galician division was already encircled. They simply didn't know it yet. By dawn on July 18th, the encirclement snapped shut. Guards tankers, their advance sustained by columns of American-supplied trucks hauling fuel and ammunition, completed a 20-kilometer arc west of Brody. Thurin. Army Corps, 85,000 men from 5 divisions, now occupied a shrinking perimeter. The Galician division formed a substantial portion of its eastern face, representing nearly 15% of the trapped force. The tactical mathematics proved merciless. Wehrmacht doctrine assumed resupply by rail and horse-drawn wagon. The Red Army operated on a motorized logistical system, while German units within the pocket rationed ammunition and fuel. Konev's forces maintained pressure from all directions. The 20-kilometer perimeter contracted hourly as Soviet infantry and armor compressed the pocket from all sides. Inside, 85,000 men began the grim calculus of breakout versus surrender. The Studebaker US-6 rolls westward from Brody, its 6-wheel drive churning through summer mud that would have mired conventional vehicles. The truck carries not survivors but replacements, fresh infantry, ammunition crates, fuel drums. Behind it stretches a mechanical artery extending 300 miles back to Soviet railheads, an unbroken chain of American-made 6-wheelers, delivering 40 tons of supplies per vehicle per week. This was the material asymmetry that decided the Eastern Front. The German Fourth Army's final supply column moved at 3 miles per hour. Horses, 60,000 of them allocated to an army group, strained against wagon traces. Draft animal transport demanded 12 pounds of feed per horse per day. A single German division in retreat required 350 tons of supplies daily, but its wagon columns could move only 125 tons across roadless terrain. Wehrmacht quartermasters calculated logistics in terms of grazing land and veterinary capacity. Soviet planners calculated in terms of fuel depots and truck maintenance battalions. The asymmetry extended to armor production. Soviet factories in 1944 manufactured 11,000 T-34-85 medium tanks. Their 85mm guns adequate for most battlefield tasks, their designs optimized for mass production. Wide tracks distributed weight across soft ground. Diesel engines started reliably in cold weather. Each factory produced identical components, each replacement crew trained on identical systems. German tank production in the same period delivered fewer than 6,000 Panthers and Tigers combined, many immobilized by mechanical failures before reaching combat. The 96 Panthers deployed with Das Reich Division at Brody represented a significant concentration of German armor. Significant precisely because such concentrations had become rare. German forces retreated not because of tactical failures, but because their logistical architecture could not sustain operations against an enemy whose supply lines moved at 30 miles per hour. Luftwaffe attempts to provide air support accomplished little against the concentration of Red Army artillery ringing the Brody perimeter. Heinkel, He-111 bombers, diverted from ground attack missions, struck at Soviet positions. But the formations were too few. The targets too dispersed, the anti-aircraft fire too intense. Meanwhile, Soviet ground attack aircraft operated with near impunity over the pocket, strafing German columns attempting to reorganize. Marshal Zhukov himself observed the assault. His account captured the systematic destruction. Hundreds of bombers struck blow after blow at the enemy group. Scores of trucks, cars, and tanks, fuel and lubricants were burning. Inside the pocket, the Galician division's position epitomized the Wehrmacht's impossible situation. Deployed as a static defensive force, the division lacked the mobility to extract itself from the developing catastrophe. No Panther tanks reinforced their sector. No motorized reserves existed to counterattack the encirclement. The perimeter contracted to 18 kilometers east to west, 12 kilometers north-south. These dimensions would shrink hourly as Soviet pressure intensified from all cardinal directions. By July 18th, 3 Army Corps command staff recognized that only one option remained: break out or die in place. At 0300 hours on July 19th, the trapped formations began their breakout. Assault columns formed in darkness along the southeastern perimeter. Tired infantry clumped around the few remaining Panther tanks, officers directing movement with shielded flashlights. The plan targeted the narrow corridor between Soviet blocking positions where reconnaissance had identified the weakest point in the encirclement ring. The collision came swift and brutal. Soviet artillery opened at 400 meters, tearing gaps in the German columns before they reached the main defensive line. Machine gun fire raked the approach routes. Men scattered, reformed, pushed forward through the cordon zone as vehicles burned behind them. For 3 days, the pocket convulsed in its death throes. Small groups penetrated the Soviet perimeter only to encounter fresh blocking detachments positioned in depth. The Ukrainian volunteers of the Galician division suffered catastrophic losses during these attempts. Organized units disintegrated into scattered bands moving westward through the forests. Soviet motorization proved decisive once again. Studebaker trucks repositioned blocking forces faster than German foot columns could march. The 2.5-ton 6x6 vehicles carried fresh infantry and anti-tank guns to plug each breach, creating a mobile containment system the horse-drawn German logistics could not counter. Every gap that opened was sealed within hours. Every breakthrough corridor became a killing ground. By July 22nd, systematic obliteration replaced chaotic battle. Soviet bombers struck the remaining pocket concentrations in organized waves. Artillery batteries registered on known German positions fired methodically, conserving ammunition while maximizing casualties. There was no longer any need to rush. The encircled forces possessed neither the strength to break out nor the supplies to hold. The Galician division recorded the highest casualty ratio of any formation in the pocket. Of 12,000 men committed, only 3 reached German lines. The remainder died in the breakout attempts, surrendered when ammunition expired, or scattered into the Galician countryside, where Soviet security units hunted them through August. 3. Army Corps ceased to exist on that date. 5 divisions annihilated. The casualty figures reflected the completeness of the disaster. 25,000 to 30,000 German soldiers lost from the original 85,000 trapped. The survivors who broke through arrived at German positions without heavy weapons, without vehicles, often without unit cohesion. They reported back to divisions that existed only as administrative designations, their combat effectiveness reduced to 0. The Brody Pocket had been erased from the map. The material advantage produced its human accounting. By the first week of August 1944, Army Group Center had lost 28 divisions, 400,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. The figure represented more than a quarter of Germany's entire Eastern Front strength. On July 8th, Lieutenant General Müller surrendered the remnants of 4th Army at the Teach River. Entire formations simply ceased to exist. The prisoner columns formed an unprecedented spectacle. Soviet photographers documented German officers marching eastward in groups of thousands, the same roads recently traveled by Studebaker six-wheelers, now channeling human traffic in the opposite direction. The 9th Army Staff. Report confirmed institutional collapse. 9th Army has virtually ceased to exist as a fighting force. It has not a single battle-worthy formation left. The catastrophe extended beyond Army Group Center's boundaries. At Brody, 5 more divisions were annihilated. Between 25,000 and 30,000 additional German soldiers were lost. The combined Bagration and Brody casualties approached 428,000 men. The Eastern Front had been torn open from the Baltic to the Carpathians. The timeline creates stark parallel developments. On June 6th, Allied forces landed in Normandy. By early August, they had advanced approximately 50 miles inland. The Western Theater claimed headlines in American and British press. Normandy dominated the newsreels. D-Day became the defining image of 1944. The Eastern Front produced different mathematics. Soviet forces advanced 300 to 400 miles in the same period. Army Group Center lost 400,000 men, killed, wounded, captured, the Normandy campaign through August 1944 produced approximately 200,000 German casualties across all categories. The disparity in scale remained largely unrecognized in Western reporting. Operation Bagration represented the single largest German military defeat of the entire war. More divisions were destroyed in 6 weeks than the Western Allies would face in the entire campaign from Normandy to the Elbe. The prisoner columns stretching eastward documented not tactical setback but strategic disintegration. Yet, in the popular memory of the war, Bagration remains a footnote, if it appears at all. We return to where this story began. March 30th, 1944. In a conference room at Foreign Armies East Headquarters, Colonel Reinhard Gehlen assembled photographic reconnaissance imagery and agent reports into a briefing document. His intelligence assessment identified precise indicators. Soviet rail movements concentrating rolling stock behind the Belarusian sectors, radio silence imposed on formations opposite the Central Front, aerial reconnaissance detecting camouflaged assembly areas east of the Dnieper. The prediction landed on desks at OKH and Army Group headquarters. It generated no operational response. The institutional architecture of German military intelligence separated assessment from authority. Gehlen commanded no divisions, controlled no reserves, issued no movement orders. His role terminated at the boundary where analysis met decision. The Foreign Armies East reports flowed upward through a command structure where strategic conviction overrode tactical evidence. Hitler's fixation on Romanian oil fields and the approaches to Budapest created gravitational pull southward. Panzer divisions concentrated opposite the First Ukrainian Front, while Gehlen's map showed Soviet armor massing in Belarusia. The prediction circulated through staff channels, annotated and filed, institutionally acknowledged but operationally ignored. Through April and May, subsequent intelligence updates refined the March assessment without altering its fundamental conclusion. Each report added specificity. Each report produced identical institutional response. Acknowledgement without action. The disconnect between intelligence accuracy and operational authority became absolute. Foreign Armies East could warn, it could not compel. June 23rd validated every element of Gehlen's assessment. The offensive struck precisely where predicted. It achieved breakthrough within hours. It encircled formations whose vulnerability was documented 3 months prior. The vindication arrived simultaneously with catastrophe. Strategic warning without operational authority produces a particular kind of tragedy, perfect foresight combined with total impotence. Gehlen lived through the intelligence officer's paradox as the Wehrmacht ignored his prediction and marched toward its greatest defeat. The failure was not analytical, it was institutional. The German command structure in 1944 had evolved mechanisms for filtering information that contradicted Hitler's strategic vision. Fortress doctrine overrode tactical reality. Economic assumptions displaced operational evidence. The man who predicted Bagration 3 months in advance watched helplessly as the formations he warned about were destroyed exactly as he foresaw. In the end, being right meant nothing. Authority belonged to those who were wrong. The summer of 1944 broke the German army in the east. Operation Bagration destroyed Army Group Center. 28 divisions, 400,000 casualties, 300 miles of retreat in 6 weeks. The Lvov-Sandomierz offensive crushed Army Group North Ukraine's southern wing, 5 more divisions annihilated at Brody, the road to Poland torn open. Combined, these operations represented the most catastrophic military defeat in German history. More men were lost than at Stalingrad. More divisions were destroyed than in any previous campaign, the Eastern Front, which had held relatively stable since 1943, collapsed across its entire central and southern sectors simultaneously. The causes were systemic. Intelligence failures that placed mobile reserves in the wrong sector. Fortress doctrine that transformed tactical defeat into certain destruction. Material asymmetry that gave the Red Army motorized logistics while the Wehrmacht relied on horses. Command structures that filtered out inconvenient truths, until those truths became catastrophes. General Erhard Raus summarized it with brutal clarity. The Supreme Command has lost all concept for time and space and their relationship with military strength. By August 1944, the Red Army stood on the Vistula River, within striking distance of Warsaw and the German frontier. The Wehrmacht would never recover the ground lost that summer. The road to Berlin had been opened, and it began with an intelligence assessment that no one acted upon, delivered on March 30, 1944, by a man who was right about everything except his ability to change anything. If you found this two-part breakdown valuable, subscribe for more deep dives into the operational history of the Eastern Front. The battles that decided the war often receive the least attention in Western histories, and that's exactly where we focus. Drop a comment below. What Eastern Front operation should we cover next?